The morning began in utter stillness, the kind that settles over Baker Street only when London itself seems reluctant to stir. A faint trembling of a violin string, the final echo of Holmes's late-night meditations, quivered in the air before dissolving into silence. The coal in the grate had long since surrendered to ash. A cup of cold tea stood abandoned beside my chair, its surface holding the thin skin of a night gone stale. Holmes had left an unopened telegram on the mantel, angled askew as though placed there in haste before some private revelation pulled him inward. The light through the window was weak, almost apologetic, laying pale stripes upon the Persian rug as I sat amidst the remnants of another sleepless dawn. It was in that curious hush, so unlike the usual bustle of our rooms, that I sensed the day would not unfold gently. The telegram's untouched presence seemed to pulse with silent insistence, as though it carried a message too dire for the room to accept without bracing itself. Holmes, pacing slowly with hands clasped behind him, cast one glance at it before turning away, and in that gesture I felt the first subtle ripple of whatever storm was drawing near. There are moments when the beginning of a case announces itself without a word spoken, and I remember thinking that our readers, much like the friends now following my account of these events, would feel the same breath of anticipation that stirred my own thoughts. If ever there was a tale worth setting aside one's quiet morning for, it was this one. If you wish to walk with me through each shadowed turn of this investigation, as so many loyal readers of my notes have done when gathered round the fire or eager for the next installment, I invite you to keep close, for the path from that silent room would soon wind into darker alleys than even Holmes expected. Holmes remained by the window for several minutes without speaking, his gaze fixed not upon the street, but somewhere far beyond it, as though the pale morning light concealed a cipher only he could decipher. The unopened telegram on the mantelpiece had acquired an almost theatrical significance in that silence, a small square of paper whose weight felt strangely disproportionate to its size. I rose at last, unable to ignore the sense that the message, whatever it contained, had already begun its slow gravitational pull upon our morning. When I reached for it, Holmes's voice cut across the room, soft yet edged with unmistakable warning. "Pray, Watson," he murmured, "open it with care." Something in its arrival rang off-key. His choice of words struck me as peculiar, for I had heard no ring, no messenger's knock, nothing to indicate the telegram's arrival during the night. But I knew better than to question Holmes on such matters before he was ready to elaborate. His instincts, honed by years of listening to the subtleties of London's ceaseless pulse, required no explanation, broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The telegram was brief. So brief, in fact, that its urgency seemed to compress the letters into a tight cluster. Urgent, require Mr. Holmes at once. Stop, matter of extreme gravity. Stop, please come before further. Loss occurs. Stop, Larch Solicitor, Old Kendry Road. There was a postscript, hastily scrawled below the operator's printed portion, crooked enough to suggest a trembling hand. Do not speak of the alley. The simplicity of those 5 words struck me with more force than the official message itself. Holmes turned from the window at that moment, his eyes fixing upon mine with an intensity that conveyed far more than curiosity. "The alley," he repeated thoughtfully, as though tasting the shape of it in the air. "Which alley, Watson? London possesses thousands, but very few provoke a man to warn us against uttering their name." I could only shake my head, for Old Kendry Road was not an area I knew well. Holmes motioned for me to hand him the telegram, and I did so. As he examined it, he walked to the hearth, nudging aside the cold ash with the toe of his slipper. His movements were restless, yet deliberate, the same pattern I had observed in him when a case presented 2 possible doors and he had not yet chosen which to enter. "Observe," he said, lifting the telegram between his fingers. "The operator's script is steady. The postscript, however, was added after the telegram was stamped. This Larch was too agitated to trust the telegraph with that final line." He ran a thumb over the ink as though absorbing some residue of the man's fear. Our departure was swift, for Holmes wished to reach the solicitor's office before any interference, or harm, could befall the poor man. As we stepped outside, the morning had sharpened into clearer form. Horses clattered past, hansom cabs rattled along Baker Street, and tradesmen called out their wares with the routine vigor of a city waking into its daily turmoil. Yet, beneath the ordinary bustle, I perceived a faint tremor of unease in Holmes that I could not quite place. He walked with unusual stillness, his coat swinging lightly at his sides, eyes flicking from one passer-by to the next with heightened vigilance. It was as though he expected some shadow to detach itself from the street corners and follow us. As the hansom cab carried us toward Old Kendry Road, he remained uncharacteristically reserved. He leaned forward occasionally as though listening to some distant echo beneath the wheel's steady clatter. "Watson," he said suddenly, "there are corners of this city even Lestrade hesitates to tread, places where fear lingers longer than footsteps. This telegram refers to one of them." He did not elaborate further, and I sensed that whatever knowledge he possessed about this unnamed alley was not yet ready to emerge into daylight. The solicitor's office, tucked between a shuttered apothecary and a dreary tobacconist, bore signs of long neglect. Peeling paint clung to the doorframe like old scabs, and the knocker hung crookedly from one loose screw. Yet when Holmes tapped it, the response from within was immediate. A rapid shuffling, the click of a lock, and the cautious parting of the door. A pale, narrow face peered out. Mr. Edwin Larch looked like a man carved out of candle wax, his features wan and melting, his eyes darting from Holmes to me, and then to the street as though expecting pursuit. Come in," he whispered, ushering us inside before he closed the door with unceremonious haste. The interior of his office was suffocatingly small. Papers lay scattered across every available surface, forming precarious towers that trembled each time Larch moved. A faint odor of stale ink and damp wool permeated the room. The man himself seemed incapable of stillness. His fingers twitched against his sleeves, and he failed to meet Holmes's gaze for more than a heartbeat. "I'm grateful you came," he said in a voice that cracked at the edges. "I feared. Well, no matter what I feared. You must understand, Mr. Holmes, that I did not know whom else to turn to." Holmes seated himself with calm precision, folding one leg before him and settling his hands upon his knee. "Your telegram spoke of a matter of extreme gravity," he said. "Begin at the beginning, if you please." Larch swallowed hard. "It concerns a client of mine, Mr. Arthur Penley. He was not a man given to rash actions. Yet 3 nights ago, he insisted upon visiting a certain alley off Old Kendry Road. He went alone. He did not return." His fingers tightened until the knuckles blanched. "The alley is ill-reputed. People avoid it, not openly, mind you. It is not marked on maps. Cabmen pretend ignorance if asked to drive near it. Some say curses linger there." He hesitated. "Others speak of disappearances." "And you?" Holmes asked quietly. "What do you speak of, Mr. Larch?" A long breath shuddered out of the man. "I speak only of what I have seen. Penley left behind a small locked box, instructing me to keep it safe until his return. When he did not come back, I attempted to open it. I should not have done so." His voice trembled. Inside was a metal plate etched with a symbol, the same symbol I saw carved into a wall near that accursed place, and ever since I touched it, I have felt watched, followed, hounded by unseen eyes. Holmes leaned forward. "Show me the box." Larch retrieved it from a drawer with visible reluctance. The box was small, fashioned of dark wood reinforced with brass at the corners. Holmes examined it carefully, his expression deepening with each second. When he lifted the lid, I saw a glint of metal, cold, perfectly smooth, and marked with a sigil I did not recognize, something between a spiral and a claw. Holmes held the plate delicately, turning it to catch what little light filtered through the grimy window. "Interesting," he murmured. Watson, observe the faint discoloration near the edges. Heat exposure, yet the wood of the box is unscorched. Larch's voice broke. I should never have opened it. I felt something I cannot describe, as though the air thickened around me, as though something had marked me. Holmes returned the plate to its box. Fear has its own fingerprints, Mr. Larch, but do not let them mislead you. Nothing can mark a man so quickly unless he imagines the mark first. Yet as he spoke, I detected a subtle shift in his tone, an undertone of calculation rather than dismissal. Outside, a carriage rattled past, and Larch flinched as though struck. Holmes rose with quiet authority. Mr. Larch, you will remain here and speak to no one of our visit. Watson and I shall examine this alley. Your role now is to stay alive long enough to be of further use. The man sank into his chair, weak with relief or fear. It was impossible to tell. As Holmes and I stepped back into the morning light, a gust of wind slammed the door behind us, the sound echoing down the narrow street like the crack of a whip. Holmes paused, eyes narrowing toward the direction of Old Kendry Road. Watson, he said, this is no ordinary disappearance. The alley awaits. He said nothing more, yet I felt the weight of that word. Awaits, as though the alley itself were a living thing, crouched and listening. Mr. Edwin Larch remained a figure in my thoughts long after we left the confines of his cramped, airless office. There had been something unnervingly fragile about the man, as though fear had hollowed him out from within, leaving only the semblance of a solicitor behind. Holmes walked with measured steps beside me, his coat flaring slightly with each stride and his eyes fixed upon the cobblestones ahead, though I could tell he was not seeing them. His mind had already begun its silent, intricate dance around the elements of Larch's tale. The symbol etched upon the metal plate had caught his attention with uncommon intensity, and I knew better than to disrupt the fragile rhythm of his thoughts. Old Kendry Road lay in a district of London seldom visited by those with respectable business. Its streets bore a thin film of soot that no amount of foot traffic could hope to disturb, and the people who passed us did so with a hurried manner that suggested their errands were less chosen than imposed by unfortunate necessity. As the hansom cab carried us deeper into that neighborhood, Holmes finally broke his silence. Larch's fear is genuine, he said. But genuine fear does not guarantee genuine danger. The two often walk together, but not always hand in hand. And what of the missing man? I asked. Penley. Do you believe he vanished by mere misadventure? Holmes gave a faint, mirthless smile. A man ventures into an alley whispered about by cabmen and common folk alike. He leaves behind a locked box containing an object of apparent significance. He never returns. Does that strike you as misadventure? I conceded it did not. We arrived once more at the solicitor's office, for Holmes insisted we had departed prematurely in our haste. I observed enough to know that we missed something, he announced as we stepped inside. Larch was seated at his desk, fingers entwined so tightly that his knuckles resembled small bleached stones. He rose the moment we entered, horror and gratitude wrestling over his features. I did as you instructed, he said weakly. I spoke to no one. Have you already learned anything? Holmes regarded him with a calmness that bordered on clinical. That depends entirely upon what you tell us now. You mentioned that Mr. Penley was not a man given to rash actions. Elaborate. Arthur Penley, Larch began, steadying his breath, was a man of singular habits, quiet, methodical. He kept few acquaintances and trusted even fewer. Yet he came to me 3 weeks ago in a state I had never before witnessed in him. He spoke of an obligation, a debt not of money but of honor. He said he had stumbled across information of grave importance, something that placed him in jeopardy. When I asked him what that information was, he refused to say, only that he needed to secure a certain item. Holmes's voice sharpened almost imperceptibly. The item being the plate or the box? I believe the box. He carried it with him, unopened. He told me that if anything befell him, I was to keep it secure until he sent word. But he seemed convinced that his journey into that alley would settle matters one way or another. He would not say what those matters were. Holmes paced slowly across the narrow room, his gaze sweeping over every inch. Papers piled haphazardly, a cracked teacup, the soot-stained window pane. "Tell me, Mr. Larch," he said softly, "have you observed anyone following you? Anyone loitering outside your office?" Larch hesitated. "I cannot be certain. Twice this week I believed I saw a figure across the street. Someone tall, perhaps. A dark coat. But when I looked again, they had vanished." Holmes glanced at me, and though his expression offered no explanation, I sensed the significance of that detail. "Fear has many shadows," he said to Larch. "Some real, some imagined. Yet the imagined ones often reveal more than the real." The solicitor sank back into his chair, defeated by confusion. Holmes turned to me with a decisive nod. "We must examine Penley's belongings. Did he leave anything else in your care, Mr. Larch?" The man reached beneath his desk and retrieved a bundle of papers, tied with a frayed string. "Only this, his correspondence. I dared not open it." Holmes snatched it gently but firmly from his hands and untied the string. A stack of letters spilled out. Most ordinary receipts and estate-related matters. Nothing unusual until he reached the final envelope. It bore no stamp and no name, only the faint trace of soot along its edges. He slid out the folded paper within, and the moment he did, a subtle change came over him. His posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed. "Watson," he said quietly, "observe the ink." I leaned closer. The fragmentary sketch on the page depicted a crude outline of an alley, narrow, curving, obscured by an overhang of mismatched buildings, and at its far end stood a door. The same sigil from the metal plate had been drawn upon it, though far less precisely. Beneath the drawing, Penley had scrawled a single sentence: "If I do not return, destroy the key." Larch's breathing grew ragged. "What key? What does he mean?" Holmes folded the paper, returned it to the envelope, and slipped both into his pocket. It is clear Penley believed his venture into that alley would conclude either in resolution or a catastrophe. The fact that he prepared this sketch suggests he predicted the latter. You mean he expected to vanish?" Larch stammered. Holmes lifted the locked box from the solicitor's desk. Whoever or whatever waited for him in that alley was something he believed he could not outrun. A tremor passed through the room, though no physical cause could be seen. Holmes motioned for us to leave, and Larch, desperate for reassurance, clutched his own arms as though to steady himself. "Mr. Holmes," he whispered, "you believe I'm in danger?" Holmes paused at the door. "I believe," he said, "that danger has already noticed you." Outside, the air felt as though it had thickened, weighted by the solicitor's terror. Holmes and I walked in silence for several minutes. At last, he spoke. "Watson, did you observe the soot on the letter? It matches the discoloration on the plate. That suggests fire, but no ordinary fire. Something contained, directed. You think Penley witnessed some unusual occurrence in that alley?" "I think," Holmes replied, "that Mr. Penley encountered something or someone who wished to remain hidden. And hidden things rarely appreciate visitors." We took a hansom cab toward the broader streets, and as the cab jolted to a halt at a corner where the pavement narrowed, Holmes suddenly tapped the driver's shoulder. "Stop here," he commanded. He stepped down and motioned for me to follow. The street was crowded with vendors and hurried pedestrians, yet Holmes's attention fixed upon a single detail, a man standing several yards away, half hidden beneath the awning of a shuttered shop. Tall, dark coat. The man turned the instant Holmes noticed him and blended into the moving crowd with uncanny swiftness. "Did you see?" Holmes asked sharply. "I saw him turn," I replied, "but I cannot be certain he watched us." Holmes's eyes drilled through the fading outline of the stranger. He was not watching us, Watson. He was watching Larcher's office. His voice dropped to a grave whisper. We arrived just in time. We resumed our course, and as the cab carried us away, I could not shake the feeling that the stranger's momentary presence signaled a deeper game unfolding, one in which Holmes and I had been invited not by choice, but by the misfortune of crossing its threshold. Holmes broke the silence once more. This watcher, this shadow, he knows the alley, and he knows that we now approach it. Penley's disappearance was not the beginning. It was merely the moment the hidden became visible. I asked him then whether he believed the alley's reputation was earned or exaggerated by rumor. A rare flicker crossed his face. Not fear, but something adjacent to it. London, he replied, is a city of doors, Watson. Some open easily. Some remain locked for good reason. But a door that is whispered about, that is the kind one should approach only with extraordinary care. As we rounded the corner and Old Kendry Road came into view, the sky seemed to dim ever so slightly, as though the sun itself recoiled from what lay ahead. Holmes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Larch told us not to speak of the alley. He never told us why. Now we shall discover it for ourselves. And with that, we stepped toward the place where Penley had vanished, and where, I feared, more than one shadow waited to claim its next victim. Old Kendry Road narrowed as we advanced, the respectable facades of the surrounding streets giving way to structures that leaned inward as though conspiring against the light. The cobblestones grew uneven beneath our steps, and the usual rhythm of London, the clatter of hooves, the chatter of vendors, the clang of distant machinery, seemed to recede into a muffled hum. It was here that Holmes slowed, his eyes shifting not with curiosity, but with the precise calculation of a man measuring the tension in the very air. His hand brushed briefly against the inside of his coat where his revolver rested, an action so subtle that only years of familiarity allowed me to notice it. We approach the boundary, he murmured. Observe how the city thins, Watson. Fear does that. It scrapes away life until only the bare bones remain. Ahead lay the alley, though at that distance it resembled nothing more than a slit of darkness between two rows of decaying brick. No sign bore its name, no map acknowledged it, and yet it existed as palpably as any well-trodden street. As we neared, I found myself involuntarily slowing, my boots catching slightly against the stones as though my body wished to offer me a second chance to turn back. Holmes noticed. Perfectly natural response, he said. Instinct resists entering places where danger lingers, but instinct is rarely precise enough for my purposes. We reached the mouth of the alley, and for a moment I thought, perhaps foolishly, that the darkness within moved not with the slow drift of shadow, but with purpose. The alley stretched no more than 30 yards, yet the far end seemed impossibly distant, as though distorted by some optical trick of its own design. Water glistened along the edges where a narrow ditch collected runoff from the surrounding buildings. The smell was of mildew, wet stone, and something else. A faint, metallic tang that stirred an uneasy familiarity, as though it echoed the scent of a surgical theatre abandoned mid-procedure. Holmes stepped forward with the deliberate care of a man entering an opponent's drawing room unannounced. This, he said quietly, is not merely an alley, Watson. It is a boundary between two systems, the known and the concealed. He gestured toward the walls where faint markings, the size of coins, had been scratched into the stone. They resembled crude symbols, half erased by time, yet several bore a disturbing resemblance to the sigil etched onto Penley's metal plate. Someone marked this place, Holmes said, and someone else attempted to remove the evidence. A distant creak, possibly from a shutter, echoed faintly through the narrow passage, heightening the sense that the alley possessed a voice of its own, one that spoke only in fragments. Holmes knelt beside one of the markings, brushing dust from its surface. Fresh scrape marks, he noted, within the last week. Someone returned to tamper with these. Before I could respond, the shuffle of footsteps reached us. They were slow, deliberate, and accompanied by the faint rasp of a heavy coat sleeve brushing stone. Holmes straightened, every line of his posture sharpening. A moment later, an elderly lamplighter emerged from a side passage barely visible in the gloom. He was a stooped man with wispy grey hair, his coat several sizes too large for his frame. He stopped abruptly upon noticing us, and for an instant his eyes widened with unmistakable dread. "No call to be here, sirs," he said in a voice that quavered with age and something darker. "No good comes of it. No good at all." Holmes approached him with the courteous but piercing manner that had unsettled many a witness. "Good evening. Your presence suggests you tend the lamps here. That would make you familiar with this place." The lamplighter shook his head vehemently. "I tend the lamps around, sir. Around. Not within. Never within." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "And why is that?" "Orders, sir," the man whispered. "From the yard, from the parish, from the folk that remember what happened." He cast a nervous glance down the alley. "Lights don't hold steady in there. Flame goes queer, flickers sideways." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me, one that told me he had just received a piece of information he would file under significant, not sensational. "Has anyone passed through recently?" he asked. The old man hesitated. His fingers twitched around a crooked stick he carried. "Might have been a gentleman. 3 nights past. Looked troubled. Kept glancing behind him as he went. Didn't walk proper, more like he was pulled." "Pulled?" Holmes repeated. The lamplighter nodded slowly as though ashamed of the word. "Aye. Pulled by what he feared. Folk who enter there at night don't always move of their own accord." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Did he return?" The lamplighter lowered his gaze. "No, sir. But the alley. It ain't fond of letting go once it takes notice." He looked at Holmes with sudden urgency. "Turn back, sir. If you value your companion, turn back." Before Holmes could question him further, the man retreated into the side passage, vanishing as abruptly as he had appeared. The hush that followed was deeper than the original silence, heavier somehow, as though the alley absorbed the old man's warnings and held them between its bricks. Holmes exhaled thoughtfully. "Superstition," he said, though even to my ears his tone lacked conviction. "But superstition often germinates from the seed of truth." He motioned for me to follow him deeper into the alley. With each step, the light behind us dimmed until the entrance resembled a distant rectangle of gray. The walls, pierced by narrow windows, rose sharply on either side, yet every window was tightly shuttered, as if their occupants refused to witness whatever transpired below. The metallic scent grew stronger, mingling with the unmistakable odor of damp decay. We reached the midpoint when Holmes halted. "Here," he said, pointing to the ground. I saw a faint impression in the dirt beside the ditch, a footprint barely visible. Holmes crouched and traced its outline. Light tread, narrow heel. Penlay's build matches this. He followed its trail several steps before it disappeared abruptly near the right-hand wall. "He paused here," Holmes murmured, or was made to pause. Then I noticed something, a faint scratch along the wall, vertical, about shoulder height. Not a symbol, not a mark, a scrape, one made by fingernails or perhaps the clasp of a bag. "Holmes," I said, pointing. He examined it with swift interest. Fresh, within days. Penlay left a sign, intentional or otherwise. At that moment, a sudden gust rattled down the alley, swirling dust into small eddies at our feet. A shutter creaked violently above us, slamming against its frame with a force that made me start. Holmes, however, remained motionless, his attention fixed upon the far end of the alley where a door, dark, unremarkable, yet radiating a palpable heaviness, stood recessed within the brickwork. That, Holmes said quietly, is the heart. The door was weathered and unadorned, but at its base, barely perceptible, lay a faint ash-like residue. Holmes knelt beside it, brushing it gently with his fingertips. Same residue found on the plate, a controlled burn, not accidental. Someone burned something here? I asked. Or someone, he replied softly, though I sensed he offered the possibility not as certainty but as provocation for deeper thought. From somewhere above, a soft rustle echoed, movement in one of the shuttered rooms. I looked up, but nothing stirred. The alley seemed to breathe around us, shifting subtly with the currents of unseen watchers. Holmes rose slowly, his expression harder now, the sharpness in his eyes reminiscent of cases that had driven him beyond the realm of mere puzzles and into that of mortal stakes. This alley is not abandoned, Watson. It is curated, maintained. Whatever occurred here involved more than Penley's disappearance. He stepped closer to the door, tilting his head as though listening to something within. I felt an involuntary prickling along my spine, as if we had trespassed upon a place not meant for daylight or for honest inquiry. Holmes turned toward me with grave composure. We shall not enter now, not without preparation, but understand this. Penley reached this door, and something ensured he did not leave it. A whisper of movement flickered at the alley's entrance, a figure, perhaps, or simply the shift of light. Holmes saw it too. We are observed, he said. Time to withdraw. As we stepped back toward the mouth of the alley, the oppressive air seemed to release us reluctantly. The sunlight felt foreign when it touched my face once more. Holmes walked without speaking, his mind tightening around conclusions not yet spoken aloud. Behind us, the alley stood silent again. Watching, waiting. Holmes did not speak for several minutes after we left the grim mouth of the alley. His silence, far from empty, felt densely coiled, as though each step he took tightened the invisible threads of thought, weaving themselves through his mind. I had witnessed this state often. He became at once present and absent, his stride unbroken, yet his gaze trained upon sights invisible to ordinary men. When at last he stopped at a street corner overlooking the narrow slant of Old Kendry Road, he drew a measured breath and turned to me with a quiet resolve. We must return, he said, but not to observe, as we did, to understand. What is it you believe lies behind that door? I asked. Holmes's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with the solemnity of a man acknowledging the gravity of the unknown. Not what, he said. Who? That door serves a purpose, Watson, a deliberate one, and whatever purpose it serves, Penley discovered it too late. He led me back toward the alley, though this time we did not enter immediately. Holmes studied the surrounding walls, the deserted windows, the sludge-colored gutters, and the uneasy rhythm of the street that bordered the alley. Everything fed into his silent calculus. A milkman passed by with unusual haste, keeping his gaze fixed firmly upon the pavement. A group of boys, barefoot and ragged, dared one another to approach the alley but fled, shrieking, with exaggerated bravado before crossing its threshold. Holmes watched them all with the same analytic stillness. The most telling truth, he murmured, is often found not in what is spoken, but in what is avoided. He stepped into the alley once more, and I followed, feeling again that unshakable shift in atmosphere, as though the world beyond its walls had exhaled while the alley held its breath. Holmes approached the door with careful deliberation. In the weak daylight, the surface of the wood revealed its true condition. It was far from decrepit, despite appearing so at first glance. The panels bore marks, yes, scratches, dents, a scattering of soot, but the wood itself was solid, well fitted, and maintained with an odd kind of restraint. "Someone tends this place," Holmes said softly, pressing his palm to the door. "Not frequently, but enough." He traced his fingers along the scratches spiraling near the lock. Consider these markings. They are not random. They follow a direction. See the arc? Something attempted either to force its way in or out. He leaned closer. And the marks are clean. No weathering, no softening of the edges. This occurred within the last week, within days of Penley's disappearance. The suggestion that Penley may have clawed at the very wood before us sent a cold ripple through my spine. "Holmes," I murmured, "do you suppose he struggled here?" Holmes did not answer at once. His gaze drifted upward toward the narrow windows looming above us. All were shut. Some appeared nailed. Others bore layers of grime so thick that it was impossible to determine if the rooms behind them were inhabited or long abandoned. "Watson," he said suddenly, "fetch me that broken crate." He pointed toward a piece of debris leaning against a collapsed barrel. I brought it to him, and with a swift, efficient movement, Holmes positioned it beneath the wall to the right of the door. "Stand beside me," he instructed. "We must inspect the lintel." He stepped onto the crate, balancing lightly, and examined the space above the door. I steadied his arm as he leaned forward to touch a small metallic plate half hidden beneath the warped wood of the frame. "There," he whispered. "The same sigil, the same metal. This door was marked intentionally." He dropped lightly to the ground and brushed his hands together. "This confirms that the plate Penley left with Larch is not an isolated artifact. We have stumbled upon a system, Watson, a network of signs known to a select few. The door is not merely the endpoint of our investigation. It is a nexus." Before I could press him further, the faint sound of a shutter shifting above us broke the alley's oppressive stillness. Holmes and I looked up as one. A narrow slit had appeared between the boards of a window. A single eye, dark, watchful, unreadable, glinted through the crack. Holmes did not move, nor did he signal alarm. His voice, when he spoke, was even and composed. "Good afternoon," he said to the unseen watcher. "Would you care to enlighten us regarding Mr. Penley?" The shutter snapped shut at once. Holmes exhaled lightly, but not in disappointment. Someone knows why Penley came here. Someone who does not wish to be known. We approached the door again. Holmes drew his magnifying lens from his pocket and knelt to study the soot-like residue clustering at the base. The material, under closer inspection, appeared fibrous rather than powdery, with hints of charred threads. "Not wood," he said. "Not coal. Fabric. Something was burned here, deliberately, and close to the threshold." He examined the lock next. It was old, but surprisingly intact, the metal polished by recent handling. "Watson," he said, "I suspect this door has a mechanism beyond that which is visible." With careful precision, he pressed his fingertips along the left jamb, then the right. A faint click sounded, so subtle I might have mistaken it for the settling of the alley's timber beams. Holmes's expression sharpened. "There," he whispered. "A recess, a hidden hinge or fastening." He tapped lightly, and I heard a hollow resonance from within the frame. Holmes rose swiftly. "This door opens inward, Watson, but not by conventional means. Something within the interior controls it." He stepped back, considering the entire structure. Penley must have known this. His sketch marks the door not as a simple entryway, but as a boundary. Something he feared lay on the other side. I found myself glancing toward the alley's entrance, half expecting the watcher to re-emerge. But the street beyond remained still, the distant bustle of London muted by the alley's oppressive quiet. Holmes began pacing again, each measured step echoing softly between the walls. He stopped suddenly and turned to me. "Watson, recall the lamplighter's words. Flame flickers strangely here. Lights do not behave as they should." "Yes," I replied. "You think the phenomenon is deliberate?" Holmes nodded. "A door equipped with a concealed mechanism suggests engineering. Engineering requires tools. Tools require light. If the light is distorted here, then it is because someone intended it to be." An involuntary shudder ran through me. Holmes, what manner of person constructs a place where even the light recoils? He met my gaze with a solemn gravity. A person who fears intrusion, or a person who intends to hide what cannot bear scrutiny? Then, with abrupt decisiveness, he knelt beside the door again and produced a small metal instrument from his pocket. A thin, curved tool I'd seen him use in other investigations involving concealed compartments. "We cannot open it now," he said, "but we can determine how it opens." He inserted the tool into the recess he had earlier discovered. A faint metallic vibration hummed through the wood. Holmes withdrew the tool at once. "As I suspected," he said. "There is tension, springs or counterweights. Opening this door requires something we do not yet possess." He closed the box gently around the tool and stood, brushing dust from his knees. "We must find the key, Watson. Not the literal key, though such may exist, but the conceptual one, the principle by which this door yields." The alley seemed to press closer, listening. Holmes stepped back and surveyed the entire scene with renewed clarity. "Penley came here," he said. "He stood where we stand. He may even have touched this door, and something happened so swiftly, so decisively, that he had no chance to return to Larch." He turned to me. "We must speak again with the woman by the river. She has seen what others fear to voice. Whatever knowledge she holds may reveal what Penley knew and what the alley protects." As we left the alley behind, I felt its stillness cling to us like a residue, as though we carried some fragment of its secret with us. Holmes walked with increasing urgency, the lines of concentration deepening across his brow. Behind us, the alley remained silent, but its silence was not empty. It pulsed with restrained purpose, like a sealed chamber waiting for the next trespasser to unlock its truth. The Thames lay dull and heavy beneath an overcast sky, its slow-moving surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a barge forcing its way upstream. Holmes walked beside me with brisk determination, though I sensed his thoughts moving at a deeper current than the river before us. The alley, the door, the secreted mechanism. Each had lodged itself in his mind, as inevitable as breath. He said nothing during our journey, but the set of his jaw and the sharp stillness in his gaze betrayed the gravity of his contemplation. He had spoken of the woman by the river as though she were a missing fragment of a map he had already begun to decipher. We reached the embankment near Blackfriars, where the smell of brine mingled with coal smoke drifting from the barges. A line of rough wooden steps descended to a muddy landing where washerwomen often worked, though at this hour only a few silhouettes lingered. Holmes scanned each face with quick, surgical precision until his gaze settled on a lone woman seated upon an overturned crate. She wore a threadbare shawl pulled close around her face, though even from a distance I could see the pallor of her skin and the thinness of her frame. Holmes approached her with the same quiet respect he reserved for those too accustomed to being ignored by the world. "Mrs. Calder," he said gently. The woman flinched at the sound of her name and drew her shawl tighter. "I told the man who asked me that I ain't saying anything more," she whispered. "Not to the Yard, not to anyone." Holmes crouched beside her. "The Yard may press for information, but I do not. I seek only truth, madam, and truth harms no one unless it is withheld." She regarded him with suspicion, though her eyes softened almost imperceptibly as he spoke. "You're Sherlock Holmes," she murmured, as though the name itself held a peculiar blend of hope and dread. "I am," he replied, "and I believe you saw Arthur Penley on the night he vanished." Her breath caught. She looked toward the river, as though searching its murky depths for courage. "I saw a gentleman," she said slowly. "I didn't know his name then. Only after folk began whispering did I realize who he must have been." Holmes waited, offering silence rather than pressure. The woman's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "He came down from Old Kendry Road. I was walking home from my aunt's when I saw him. He looked lost. Not lost like a man who's taken a wrong turn, but lost inside himself, as if he'd left part of his mind behind him in that awful place. "Did he speak to you?" Holmes asked. She hesitated before nodding. "Not properly. He grabbed my arm, hard enough that I've still got the bruises, and he said, 'Don't let it open,' that's all. 'Don't let it open.' Then he let go of me and staggered toward the river. I thought he meant to throw himself in. I followed him to make sure he didn't, but when he reached the embankment, something changed." Holmes leaned closer. "Changed how?" "He stopped moving like a man," she whispered. He froze. His head jerked to the side as though listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he walked away, straight into the dark part under the arches. And that's the last I saw of him. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. "You believe someone was following him?" he said. The woman shuddered. "I don't know what it was, but I felt a chill, like the air turned against me. I ain't been back near that alley since." Holmes's voice softened. "And you mentioned once, a figure? Someone watching?" A faint tremor crossed her lips. "Yes, a man, or maybe a shadow. It ain't right, Mr. Holmes, for a shadow to move before the man does." Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw the subtle tightening in his jaw. "Did he appear again after Penlay left?" She nodded weakly. "Aye. He stepped out from behind a pillar after the gentleman disappeared. He looked at me, straight at me. Not a man's look, Mr. Holmes, more like a warning." Her voice cracked. She pulled her shawl over her face and sobbed silently. Holmes placed a hand upon her arm with rare tenderness. "Mrs. Calder, you have shown courage by speaking. You will not be harmed on account of it. You have my word." She lowered her shawl just enough for her eyes to meet his. "If you mean to go to that door," she whispered, "then may God go with you. That place ain't meant for men like you. It ain't meant for any man still breathing." Holmes rose slowly, his gaze fixed not upon her, but upon the water, as though the river mirrored the truth he sought. When we stepped away, he did not speak until we had reached the embankment's upper walkway. "Watson," he said quietly, "there is something profoundly unnatural about a place that bends human behavior. Penlay's words, Calder's terror, the watcher in the alley, all point to a psychological force beyond ordinary intimidation." "You believe he was coerced?" I asked. "Not by threat," Holmes replied. "By influence, a pressure exerted upon his will. Something compelled him. Calder noted as much. He did not walk of his own volition." A chill crept along my spine. "Holmes, surely you do not suggest—" "That the alley possesses some mystical property," he interrupted, not unkindly. "No, I leave superstition to poets. But I do suggest that fear, true visceral fear, can be induced through far subtler means than physical threat. Penlay may have been subjected to something designed to erode judgment." He resumed walking, his pace faster now, as though the woman's account had ignited a fresh series of calculations. "Consider her words, Watson. Don't let it open. What did he fear would open? The door? The mechanism behind it? Or something far less tangible?" "Holmes," I said slowly, "you believe Penlay knew what lay beyond it?" "I believe," he replied, "that he glimpsed something through it." We returned to the main road where a hansom cab awaited. Holmes instructed the driver toward the south side of the river. As we rode, he spoke with clipped precision. "Calder's account confirms Penlay fled the alley, but was not free of its influence. Whatever he saw continued to pursue him long after he departed. The watcher's presence strengthens this conclusion." "And his instruction, 'Don't let it open,'" I pressed. Holmes's eyes gleamed, not with fear, but with an intellectual fire. "That is the crux. It implies the door is not merely symbolic. It is functional. It opens, and something on the other side should not." The cab rattled over uneven stones. Holmes leaned forward, hands folded, gaze burning with a clarity I rarely saw in him outside the gravest cases. Calder spoke of the arches beneath the embankment. Penley went there after leaving the alley. That suggests a route. Concealed, indirect, deliberate. You believe he tried to hide? No, Holmes said. I believe he tried to destroy something. Perhaps the key he mentioned, or perhaps whatever connection existed between him and that door. He paused, his voice lowering to a quiet, chilling certainty. Something followed him, Watson. Something that wished the door to open. A heaviness settled in my chest. Holmes, do you fear for our safety? He turned to me, and though his face held its usual composure, I saw a flicker of something beneath it. Not fear, but urgency. Fear, my dear Watson, is an emotion I permit only when it serves purpose. But caution is essential. Penley realized too late what he had approached. We shall not make the same mistake. He tapped lightly upon the edge of the cab, turning his face once more toward the river. Our next step takes us to a location seldom visited, except by men seeking solitude or trouble. Beneath the arches, we may find what remains of Penley's last attempt to break free of the alley's grasp. The cab rolled to a slow stop as the Thames, dark and wide, flowed beneath the stonework ahead. Holmes stepped down with quiet resolve, his coat trailing behind him like a shadow against the grey of the embankment. Come, Watson, he said, the river may yet yield truths the alley concealed. As we approached the descent into the arches, I felt the weight of the case settle more deeply upon us, as though the city's very breath thickened in anticipation. The arches beneath the southern embankment formed a half-lit labyrinth of shadow and echo, a place where the river's murmur mingled with the distant groan of barges and the hollow drip of unseen leaks. Holmes descended the worn stone steps with deliberate caution, as though he were following the fading outline of Penley's final steps. I trailed close behind, my boots slipping slightly on the damp moss that clung to the stones. A faint breeze carried the cold breath of the Thames inward, and with it came the unmistakable scent of decay, an odor that suggested not only the detritus of the river, but the lingering presence of human despair. Holmes held his lantern low, its flame shuddering as if in protest. "Observe the scorch marks," he said quietly, pointing to a darkened patch along the wall. Penley paused here, and something burned, though the pattern suggests a concentrated, intentional ignition rather than an accident. I knelt beside the wall and touched the blackened stone. The soot clung lightly to my fingers, finer than ash, more like dust that had once been something tightly woven. "The same residue as near the door," I murmured. Holmes nodded. He attempted to destroy something here, something important enough that he risked drawing attention. We followed the curve of the arch until the lantern revealed a recess carved into the stone. It could easily have been overlooked, a pocket of darkness swallowed by shadow. Holmes stepped inside without hesitation, and I followed with a tightening in my chest. The recess was scarcely wide enough for two men, yet its depth stretched further than expected. At the very end lay a heap of charred remnants, fragments of paper curled like dried petals, slivers of wood reduced to brittle finery, and among them a single metal clasp. Holmes lifted the clasp and examined it. "The box," he said. "Penley destroyed part of it, but not all." "You think he removed the metal plate first?" I asked. "I think he intended to destroy both box and plate," Holmes replied. "But he succeeded in burning only the former." Something interrupted him. A distant rumble of traffic above resonated through the stone, but beneath that mundane sound was another, a faint scuff, like a foot brushing against gravel. Holmes stiffened. He extinguished the lantern at once, plunging us into near darkness, broken only by thin slivers of river light filtering through the arches. We stood absolutely still. The scuff came again, this time closer. Holmes's voice was a breath beside me. "We are not alone." The silhouette that appeared at the edge of the arch was tall and angular, the same figure, or one of similar manner, who had watched Larcher's office. The man paused when he saw us, though his face remained obscured by shadow. For a moment, I thought he might approach, but instead he retreated with startling speed, vanishing around the curve. Holmes reacted instantly. He seized my arm. "Follow, Watson, but do not lose caution." We hurried after the figure, our footsteps echoing sharply as we turned the corner. But the arch beyond lay empty, the path clear, no sign of the stranger left behind. "He knew we were coming," Holmes muttered, "or he followed Penley's house, to Penley's trail as we did. He watches not the alley alone, but the consequences of the alley." We returned to the recess, relit the lantern, and Holmes resumed his examination with renewed urgency. As he sifted through the charred material, something metallic glinted beneath his fingers. A small, blackened hinge, half melted. Holmes studied it. "This hinge is of identical make to the box's construction. Penley attempted to destroy the entire container. But why? What was he trying to prevent?" A few steps away, a narrow drainage pipe protruded from the stone. Holmes crouched beside it, his lantern casting a soft glow into its grim interior. Something caught the light. He reached in with careful precision and extracted a sodden scrap of parchment. When he unfolded it, I recognized the shape at once. A symbol. The sigil that had marked the metal plate. Only this one had been drawn in haste, perhaps in terror, its lines uneven and jagged, as though the hand that drew it shook uncontrollably. "Another warning," Holmes murmured. "Another attempt at preservation or destruction." He placed the scrap gently into his pocket and rose. "Watson, Penley feared the opening of that door. He attempted to sever the threads tying him to it, but he was too late. What compels a man to draw a symbol twice, once with precision, once in desperate panic?" I asked. Holmes's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A man who understands the full weight of what that symbol represents. We must assume Penley uncovered a network, a design of human origin, not supernatural force. And the center of that network is the door." We left the recess and climbed the steps back into the dim light of afternoon. The breeze from the river felt different, colder, as though our discovery beneath the arches had stirred something better left dormant. Holmes signaled a cab, and as we rode northward, he spoke with increasing intensity. "Penley's actions reveal a man torn between duty and terror. He left evidence behind, deliberately or impulsively, each piece pointing toward a system of secrecy. The sigil is not art. It is not ornament. It is a mark of belonging, or exclusion." "And the watcher?" I pressed. "He appeared twice. Once at Larches, once beneath the arches." "Yes," Holmes said quietly. "A man who hides his features is almost always more concerned with what he reveals than whom he observes. He's not an agent of chaos, but of control. His purpose is to guard, not to hunt." "You believe he is connected to the alley?" "I believe he's connected to what lies beyond the door," Holmes answered. "But we cannot confront him yet. We lack context, and he expects pursuit." We arrived at a district far from the river, a cluster of warehouses and storage yards, where Holmes guided me toward an unmarked brick building set between a cooper's shop and an abandoned stable. Inside, dust hung thick in shafts of light filtering through the slanted windows. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each filled with stacks of documents, long ignored and layered in time's forgetting. The air smelled of mildew and old ink. Holmes removed his hat and coat with swift purpose. "This is an archive maintained by a friend of mine at the yard," he said. "Little used, seldom visited. Exactly the sort of place where forgotten ledgers await rediscovery." "What are we seeking?" I asked. "Patterns," Holmes replied. "Connections. Penley must have encountered records tied to that alley. If so, they will be buried here among estate transfers, property lines, and municipal disputes long dead." For nearly an hour, Holmes moved through the archive with restless focus, scanning document after document, rejecting one batch and seizing another. The urgency of his movements contrasted sharply with the oppressive quiet of the room. At last he paused before a shelf in the far corner. "Here," he whispered. He withdrew a thick, leather-bound ledger. Its spine was cracked, its pages brittle. As he turned to a section marked with a faded ribbon, I saw immediately that the entries differed from the rest, names written in code, dates that did not match the annotations beside them, and a recurring symbol embedded subtly within the margin. The sigil. Holmes's eyes glittered with a rare fusion of triumph and apprehension. "Watson," he said, "this ledger ties prominent figures to the alley. Landowners, financiers, perhaps even political actors. The alley is not simply neglected. It is protected." And Penley found this. "Or something like it," Holmes said. "Something that told him the alley was never meant to be discovered." He turned another page. A faint brown stain marred the bottom corner, old but chillingly reminiscent of dried blood. Holmes traced the sigil with his fingertip. "This is no ordinary case, Watson. This ledger is a map of secrets long guarded, and Penley stumbled upon its truth." He closed the book gently, his face now shadowed with contemplation. "We must proceed with utmost caution. Men kill to protect such secrets, and men disappear." A gust of wind rattled the warehouse's shutters, and Holmes looked toward the sound with a slow, controlled exhale. "The game tightens, Watson. There are forces at play that wish to close this door forever." He placed the ledger under his arm and stepped toward the exit with renewed determination. "And now," he said, "we must answer the question Penley feared above all. Why must that door not be opened?" London's political heart beats not solely within the chambers of Westminster, but within the whispered exchanges of corridors, drawing rooms, and private clubs, where men of influence wield their power in subtler ways than the clattering debates of public assembly. Holmes strode through those districts with the sure-footed purpose of a man who understood precisely how information flowed, who controlled it, who suppressed it, and who was buried beneath it when its weight became untenable. I followed him past the grey stone buildings and iron lamp-posts, watching the rhythm of his steps quicken as the pieces of the case assembled themselves in his mind with increasing clarity. The ledger, carried beneath his arm in a sealed leather folio, seemed almost to pulse with secret vitality, its encoded names and disjointed records now a living thread linking Penley's disappearance to something far more elaborate. Holmes halted near Whitehall and surveyed the movement of officials and clerks with sharp, sweeping glances. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The pace has shifted. A tension hangs over this district, though not the kind caused by foreign negotiations or domestic agitation. This is fear, controlled, concealed, and distributed with expert discretion." I studied the passers-by. Several men in tailored coats moved with forced composure, their conversations quick and hushed. A messenger hurried across the street, clutching a packet of documents to his chest as though bracing them against unseen hands. Across the way, a barrister paused beneath an archway to light a cigarette, but his gaze flicked repeatedly toward the ministry entrance, betraying a nervous vigilance that struck me as unusual, even for political circles. Holmes continued in a lowered voice. "The ledger contains names connected not merely to estates, but to decisions. Decisions that shape the city's infrastructure, its finances, and its police jurisdiction. Men such as these do not invest in forgotten alleys without cause." "You suspect political involvement?" I asked. "I suspect political awareness," he replied, "which is often more dangerous. When powerful men know of something they cannot control, they seek to erase it." We approached the doors of a private club where Holmes enjoyed rare but genuine respect among certain officials who valued his discretion more than they feared his deductions. Inside, the thick, tobacco-laden air carried murmurs of ongoing debates. Holmes scanned the room until his eyes settled on Inspector Lestrade, seated in a corner with a copy of the Times half shielding his face. Lestrade looked up as we approached and muttered under his breath, "I wondered when you'd come pushing your way into this." Holmes sat opposite him without invitation. "You are aware, I presume, that Arthur Penley has vanished." Lestrade inhaled sharply, though he attempted to disguise it with a cough. "It's being handled." Holmes lifted an eyebrow. "By whom?" Lestrade hesitated, then folded his newspaper. "Not by me. Not officially, anyway. Word is that Mr. Penley's disappearance has been absorbed." "Absorbed into what?" Holmes asked softly. Lestrade shifted uneasily in his chair. "Into whatever business those above my station consider unfit for wider discussion. You know how it is, Mr. Holmes. Some cases rise quickly before certain desks, but vanish even faster from official ledgers." Holmes removed the folio from beneath his arm and tapped it lightly. "This ledger tells a story very different from the one presently circulating. It contains names tied to significant parcels of land surrounding Old Kendry Road, names of men who would prefer the public never learn of their involvement." Lestrade's jaw tightened. "I don't want to know what's in that book, Holmes, and if you've any sense of self-preservation, you'll keep it shut." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've heard whispers, only whispers, about that alley. Rumors that it was used years ago as a meeting place for individuals who wished to conduct business beyond the eye of the law. But those meetings stopped long before my time at the Yard." Holmes studied him. "They stopped," he echoed, "but they were never forgotten." Lestrade's gaze flicked toward the folio. "Where did you get it?" "From a source you would not approve of." Lestrade closed his eyes briefly in frustration. "Holmes, if certain men discover that ledger is in your possession, they will not come asking politely for it." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then let them come, for I intend to uncover why Penley believed that door must never be opened." Lestrade let out a weary sigh. "You always did pick the cases most likely to get us all dismissed or shot." Holmes stood. "This case chose us, Lestrade, not the reverse." Then, with a rare gentleness, he added, "And I promise you this. If I uncover anything that threatens the Yard, you shall be the first to know." Lestrade offered a grim nod, acknowledging the sincerity in Holmes's words, even if he was unwilling to accept the comfort of them. We departed the club and stepped again into the thick stir of political London. Holmes began pacing along the pavement with a renewed sharpness. "Lestrade is afraid to know more," he said, "which means he knows enough to fear. And those who fear a secret rarely fear it because it is large. They fear it because it is personal." "Personal to whom?" I asked. Holmes's lips curved into a thin, precise line. "To men whose names appear in the ledger." I could feel the tension in him strengthening with each step. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small notebook, jotting down 3 names from the ledger, names he underlined with measured strokes. "These men," he said, "held positions enabling them to manipulate municipal boundaries. Old Kendry Road's alley, if officially erased, would cease to exist in records. Yet the alley remains." His eyes gleamed. "Why preserve a place only to pretend it has vanished?" We walked toward Westminster Bridge, the Thames rolling beneath us in a grey, indifferent current. Holmes leaned against the balustrade, his gaze fixed on the water. "Watson," he said slowly, "every political rumor stems from a fear of exposure, and within the last week, 3 separate clerks have been dismissed under circumstances unusually abrupt." I watched him carefully. "You believe their dismissals connect to the alley?" "I believe they connect to what lies beyond the door," he said. "One cannot dismiss coincidence when the shadows align so neatly." He paused, fingers drumming lightly upon the stone. "The watcher who followed Penley has resurfaced twice. If he belongs to the circle connected to these names, he serves as guardian of the secret, and guardians do not intervene unless they sense the secret is threatened." "And we threaten it now," I said quietly. Holmes turned to me. "We threaten only the deceit, The truth, Watson, seeks exposure of its own accord. He resumed walking, his coat trailing behind him like a dark banner. Our next destination is obvious. If men of Parliament whisper of this alley in careful tones, then the secret was once discussed openly, albeit behind closed doors. We must find the clerk who handled estate disputes involving Old Kendry Road. And you know where to find him. Holmes's expression grew distant, touched by a gravity that suggested the stakes had risen once more. I do. Or rather, I know where to find what remains of his work. We returned to Baker Street with the ledger placed delicately upon the table as though it were a sleeping creature capable of waking at the slightest disturbance. Holmes leaned over it, sifting through the coded entries once more. "These markings," he said, tapping a fingernail over a series of slanted strokes, "are not merely initials. They form a pattern of rotation, repeated every third page. That implies a system of meeting schedules." The door was the point of entry. For whom, we must now determine. As dusk fell, casting long shadows across the room, Holmes straightened at last. "We are crossing into dangerous terrain, Watson. Political significance, hidden property lines, vanished men. The alley's secret trembles beneath our fingertips." A carriage rattled by below. Holmes looked toward the window and spoke in a low voice touched by rare solemnity. "And tomorrow we shall learn who trembles because of it." Night settled over London like a slow-closing hand, and with each hour the city's pulse grew quieter, more tentative, as though even the gas lamps sensed the strain of secrets pressing up through its cobblestones. Holmes had spent much of the evening hunched over the ledger, transcribing coded intervals, drawing faint geometric patterns across several pages of his notebook, and discarding hypothesis after hypothesis. When at last he rose, stretching his back with that feline sharpness of movement unique to him, the expression on his face told me the pieces of the riddle had begun, not to fall into place, but to lean toward one another in ominous alignment. "We return to the alley tonight, Watson," he said, fastening his coat with deliberate slowness. "The ledger speaks a truth only half comprehensible in daylight. Darkness will reveal the rest." "You expect our watcher to appear again?" I asked. "I expect," he said quietly, "that the alley has been waiting for us." The hansom cab that carried us through the dimly lit streets rocked with each bump and rut, its lantern flickering in the wind. The night was windless, yet the flame danced as though reacting to some invisible disturbance. Holmes noticed. "A trivial sign, perhaps," he murmured, "but never ignore the smallest rebellion of the physical world when the unseen is at work." Upon reaching Old Kendry Road, we dismissed the cab and descended the narrow lane on foot. The street had grown unnaturally still, its grime-coated stones gleaming with the residue of an earlier drizzle. Not a single window shone with lamplight, not a single doorstep bore the trace of domestic life. Holmes stopped short of the alley's entrance and turned slightly, examining the row of shuttered houses opposite. "Notice," he whispered, "how the windows tilt ever so slightly toward the alley, as though not each house was constructed independently, but according to a design guiding every facade toward this single point. You believe the architecture was intentional? I believe nothing this alley contains is accidental," he replied. When we entered the alley itself, its darkness felt deeper than before, not merely a lack of light, but an encroaching presence, like a velvet curtain drawn inward. Holmes stepped ahead of me, his silhouette cutting a sharper figure in the narrow confines. The distant drip of water struck the stones at regular intervals, forming a rhythm that felt almost unnervingly controlled. The midpoint, Holmes halted. "Listen." I heard only the soft drip, the faint stir of air, and my own breath echoing lightly against the walls. "No footsteps," Holmes said. "No rats scurrying, no shifting of gutters. The alley breathes only when observed." I tried to dismiss the notion, but the stillness around us had an unnatural symmetry to it, like the frozen hush of a theater waiting for the curtain to rise. Holmes crouched beside the earlier footprint, the one he believed to be Penley's, and swept the lantern's narrow beam across it. The soil had been disturbed again, not by us, not by chance. The ridges of the impression had softened as though a hand had pressed into the earth in an attempt to erase the trace. "Someone tries to remove Penley from this alley even now," he said. "Not physically, metaphorically. The case itself is being wiped clean." He raised the lantern toward the wall. A fresh marking, so faint it nearly escaped detection, had been scratched just above the earlier scrape. It bore the same sigil, but reduced this time to a single curved stroke, incomplete yet unmistakable. "The Watcher," Holmes murmured. "He marks the boundary of his influence, not the path. A warning to us, or to others following us." As we advanced deeper, the door came gradually into view, its outline dim and formidable against the alley's terminal wall. But even from afar, I sensed something had changed. The charred residue at its base had been disturbed, scattered like powder beneath the door's lip, and a set of faint depressions, footsteps, led to and from it. "Someone has been here since we last visited," I said. "Someone with a purpose," Holmes replied. We approached the door cautiously. Holmes knelt and touched the residue. For the first time since we began this case, I saw his expression shift, not with fear, but with intrigue sharpened to a razor's edge. "Still warm," he whispered. "Not hot, but recently altered. The burning was repeated tonight." "Burning what?" I asked. Holmes drew a thin breath. "Not materials, not objects, signs. Someone is trying to remove evidence of the door's use." He examined the lock again, tracing its edges with a level of precision almost surgical in its care. "The mechanism remains intact, but see here, the hinge tension has lessened. Someone opened this door recently." A wave of cold dread swept over me. "Holmes, do you intend to open it now?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced the folded parchment containing Penley's frantic sketch. Holding it beside the door, he aligned the hastily drawn sigil with the metal plate affixed to the upper frame. His eyes darkened. "What did Penley see?" he murmured to the door, not to me. A faint sound, like the sliding of cloth, echoed behind us. Holmes's hand flew to his revolver. I spun around, and at the mouth of the alley we saw him, the Watcher. Tall, motionless, face obscured in shadow. But this time, he did not flee. He stood as though rooted to the stones, a sentinel carved from the darkness itself. Holmes did not raise his revolver. Instead, he spoke with pointed calm. "You have observed us long enough. Step forward." The Watcher remained still. Holmes advanced one step, and the Watcher mirrored him, one step backward, never breaking the distance between them. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded. "And for whom do you guard this place?" Still, no answer. Holmes's voice lowered, precise and cutting. "If you belong to the Yard, you would have spoken. If you belong to Parliament, you would not be here alone. You serve the door." The Watcher retreated a final step and vanished into the street as silently as mist parting through an unseen fissure. Holmes did not chase him. Instead, he returned to the door with a grim, measured purpose. "He has revealed his allegiance," Holmes said, "whether willingly or not." "What now?" I asked. Holmes placed both hands against the door, fingers splayed as though feeling for a heartbeat. "Now we proceed with knowledge we lacked. This door is not simply a threshold. It is a meeting point, a nexus, as I suspected." He pressed lightly at the edges again, and I heard the faintest whisper of a mechanism shifting deep within the wood. It responds not to force, but to signal. A mark, a symbol, a sequence, something known to those who entered. He stepped back. "And we are not yet among them." A soft tremor passed through the ground, so subtle I might have overlooked it had Holmes not stiffened. "Watson," he said quietly, "this alley is not idle tonight. Something within it stirs." We left with the sense of being watched from every doorway and shutter. Even the lamplight outside seemed dimmer, as though recoiling from the alley's influence. Holmes walked quickly, his long strides cutting through the night with restless precision. When we reached a broader street and hailed a cab, he spoke at last. "The watcher will report our presence. Those tied to the alley will move to protect their secret." He looked at me with a solemn weight in his eyes. "And tomorrow, Watson, we will force this case into the open, because the shadows have begun to gather, and they gather for us." Dawn crept into London with a reluctant pale glow, as though the sun itself questioned whether it ought to illuminate the city's darker corners. Holmes had slept not a moment. I heard his steady pacing through the night as the city's distant hum faded into early quiet. When I rose, he stood at the center of our sitting room, coat already on, the ledger laid open upon the table like a wound exposed for examination. He turned to me with a clarity sharpened by sleepless thought. "Watson," he said, "the door will not open to those who merely seek to understand it. It opens only to those whose actions serve the design it protects. Penley tried to break from that design, and someone, perhaps several someones, ensured he could not." "You believe the watcher belongs to a larger circle?" I said. "Undoubtedly," he replied, "but not one united in purpose. Some wish the door opened, others wish it destroyed. We stand between them." He closed the ledger with a decisive snap and slipped it beneath his coat. "Today, we find the one man who stands closest to its heart." We began our journey through the quieter districts of Westminster, the morning chill sharpening each exhale. Holmes moved with swift calculation, consulting his notebook only briefly before turning into narrower lanes lined with private offices, places where clerks, agents, and intermediaries worked in repetitive obscurity, unnoticed yet essential to the machinery of government. At last, he halted before a modest brick building with a chipped sign reading "Au revoir." "Fallon, legal executor and consultant." Holmes's gaze narrowed. "Fallon," he murmured, "a man whose name appears not once, but 3 times in the ledger, each adjacent to property references tied to Old Kendry Road." "You suspect him?" I asked. "I suspect he knows more than most," Holmes replied. Inside, the office smelled of stale ink, cold parchment, and the faint ghost of tobacco. Stacks of documents lay organized in neat towers, each labeled, each catalogued, each betraying the tidy habits of a man whose livelihood depended upon details. A thin figure stood behind a tall desk, spectacles shimmering faintly in the dim light. His hair was tightly combed, his posture disciplined, yet there was a tautness about him that suggested sleepless nights or a conscience burdened by something he could not discard. Holmes approached with polite composure. "Mr. Fallon, I presume?" The man hesitated before responding, as though calculating which identity he ought to confirm. "Yes," he said at last. "How may I assist you, gentlemen?" Holmes removed the ledger with slow, deliberate gravity and placed it upon Fallon's desk. The man's face drained of color. "I believe you recognize this," Holmes said quietly. Fallon's hands twitched, his voice lowering to a strained whisper. Where did you find it?" "Where someone hoped it would remain forgotten," Holmes replied. "And now you will tell us why your name appears in connection with Old Kendry Road." Fallon swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing tightly. I cannot." Holmes leaned forward. "Cannot or will not?" Fallon's gaze darted to the door behind us, then to the shuttered window, as though expecting someone to emerge from either at any moment. "If I speak, I risk more than you can imagine," he whispered. Holmes's expression softened, not with sympathy, but with the precision of a physician identifying an exposed nerve. "Mr. Fallon," he said gently, "Arthur Penley came to you. Did he not?" The man's breath came short and ragged. He nodded. And you sent him to the alley? Fallon's eyes widened with a silent plea. He insisted, he said. He believed he had found something. Something within those records. He said he needed to see the place for himself. And you did not warn him? Holmes pressed. Fallon's shoulders sagged. I tried. He would not listen. He said he had a duty, to whom he would not tell me, but he feared something greater than any threat I could describe. I begged him not to go, but he spoke of a door that should never open. Holmes glanced at me briefly, a shadow of concern crossing his features. Fallon continued in a trembling voice. Penley believed someone intended to use the door for purposes long abandoned. He said the sigil, the very symbol etched upon the ledger pages, had reappeared in correspondence between men who had sworn never to meet again. And these men, Holmes asked, they were connected to the government? Fallon nodded. Connected, yes. Directly involved? No, that is the danger. They operate outside official structures, yet draw influence from them. Holmes folded his hands. Tell me, Mr. Fallon, what lies behind that door? Fallon's breath hitched. He sank into his chair, defeated. Once, he said in a voice barely audible, it was a meeting place. A room sealed from the city, a room where men discussed affairs too volatile for Parliament, too immoral for the courts. But that was decades ago. The gatherings ceased after a tragedy. Tragedy? I asked. Fallon nodded. One of the members, a man of high standing, died within the room under circumstances impossible to record officially. After that, the remaining members swore never to return. Yet someone did return, Holmes said. Fallon covered his face with trembling hands. Yes, someone has reawakened it. I do not know who, but I know Penley discovered their identity, or came too close. He showed me a list. Names he believed were preparing to reconvene. But he destroyed the list before leaving. He feared it would cost him his life. Holmes stepped closer. Who benefits from reopening that room? Fallon dropped his hands and looked at Holmes with desperate clarity. Men whose power depends on shadows, Mr. Holmes. Men who cannot afford the light. Holmes nodded once as though he had expected the answer. Where is the key? Holmes asked. Fallon's eyes widened again. You know of it? Penley warned a woman not to let it open, Holmes said. We assume he carried, or destroyed, a means of accessing the door. Fallon's breathing quickened. He destroyed the physical key, but the door does not open to metal alone. It opens to sequence. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. It is an old system, a signature to declare one's purpose. Holmes exchanged a dark glance with me. A ritual, he murmured. Fallon nodded. Ritual of men who believe themselves untouchable. Holmes closed the ledger and slipped it under his arm. Thank you, Mr. Fallon. You have told us more than you realize. But now you must leave London. Immediately. Fallon stared at him in astonishment. Leave? Holmes stepped closer, gripping the man's shoulder with quiet authority. The Watcher follows you as he follows us. If he realizes you have spoken, you will vanish as Penley did. Fallon's face crumpled in fear. Then what hope is there for you, Mr. Holmes? Holmes released him. Hope, he said, is found only in understanding, and understanding lies behind that door. We departed silently. When we reached the street, Holmes stopped beneath a gas lamp whose flame flickered erratically in the breeze. Watson, he said in a tone unlike any I'd heard from him before, calm but wound tight with danger, tonight we open the door. A chill passed through me. Holmes, if we do, there is no alternative, he said. The alley gathers shadows not by accident, but by summons. And the summons grows stronger. He looked toward Old Kendry Road as though the alley itself had turned to watch. Penley tried to stop it, Holmes continued. Fallon confirmed the ritual. The men who guard the door will not wait much longer." His voice lowered to a whisper. "Tonight, Watson, we confront the man behind the hidden door before he completes what Penley died trying to prevent." Twilight had surrendered to a depth of night that even London's gas lamps could not wholly dispel. The city's familiar bustle had retreated into distant murmurs, swallowed slowly by the darkness gathering over Old Kendry Road. Holmes walked at my side, his pace brisk but not hurried, his steps the measured cadence of a man who had passed beyond doubt and into the rare territory of absolute resolve. His silhouette moved ahead of me, tall and lean against the faint glow behind us, his coat shifting like a dark banner as each deliberate stride carried him closer to the boundary we had skirted for days. Whatever trepidation pulsed through my chest, Holmes did not share. But his silence, heavy, unbroken, and taut, revealed as plainly as words that he carried the full weight of the impending confrontation. When the alley came into view, the night seemed to thicken. The shadows that clung to its narrow walls looked almost sentient, deeper than before, as though the place had been holding its breath in anticipation of our return. A single gas lamp flickered at the street's far end, its flame guttering with irregular spasms, fighting an unseen pressure. Holmes stopped before the mouth of the passage, lifted his lantern, and turned to me. "If you wish to remain here, Watson, I will not hold it against you," he said quietly. I straightened at once. "You know my answer." A brief, fleeting warmth touched his features, an acknowledgement that, under different circumstances, might have blossomed into gratitude. "Then stay at my shoulder," he murmured. "Tonight the alley may not grant us a second misstep." We entered the passageway together. The familiar dampness pressed against my lungs, and the air carried that same metallic tang that had haunted our first visit. The walls, streaked with mildew, glimmered faintly in the lantern light. Every sound, our footfalls, the distant drip of water, seemed amplified, distorted by the narrowness of the space. Holmes walked with careful precision, scanning each shuttered window, each recess, each crooked brick. I could sense in him an alertness so finely tuned it bordered on premonition. But something had changed. A faint glow emanated from the far end of the alley, the door itself. Not a bright light, not even a steady one, but a thin, wavering thread of illumination that pulsed faintly from beneath its threshold. Holmes stopped short. "Watson," he whispered, "the door is not idle. Someone has gone inside." A cold sensation spread through me. "You think the watcher?" Holmes shook his head. "No. He would not dare enter without the others. This is someone who believes himself entitled." We drew closer. The faint residue of charred fibers spread in a wider arc than before, as though a fresh burning had occurred. Holmes knelt quickly, pressing his fingertips against the ash. "Still warm," he murmured. "Minutes old." As he rose, footsteps sounded behind us, a soft, measured cadence. We turned at once. A figure approached from the street, tall, cloaked, moving with the surety of someone walking toward his own domain. The watcher. But there was no hesitation in him now, no distant observation. He entered the alley with purpose, his face still masked in shadow. Holmes stepped forward, placing himself directly between the watcher and the door. "It ends tonight," he said. The figure paused. When he spoke, his voice was cold, low, and threaded with contempt. "You should not be here, Mr. Holmes." "Yet here I stand," Holmes replied. "And so do you. Let us dispense with masks." The watcher stepped forward. A sliver of moonlight caught the lower half of his face, revealing a sharp jaw and lips set in a controlled, disdainful line. His eyes, still concealed, glittered faintly beneath the brim of his hat. "You tamper with affairs far beyond your scope," the man hissed. "This door is not a matter for curious minds. It is a safeguard, an institution rooted deeper than any ledger or law." Holmes did not move. "A safeguard? Then explain Penley's disappearance." Explain the fear you sow. Explain the secrecy." Penley was weak, the watcher said. He broke the oath. He sought to expose what must remain hidden. That was his undoing. Holmes tilted his head slightly. "You admit involvement." "I admit nothing," the man growled. "But tonight you will turn away, or you will join him." My hand instinctively went to my revolver. Holmes raised a single hand to warn me back, his eyes never leaving the watcher. "The door is open," Holmes said softly, "and I intend to see why." The watcher's jaw clenched. "You are too late. The gathering has begun." He stepped into a fighting stance. But before Holmes could respond, the door behind us shifted. A low, guttural creak rolled through the alley like the exhalation of a long, dormant beast. Holmes turned sharply. The thin beam of light beneath the door grew brighter, then dimmed, then steadied into a faint glow. "Watson," he whispered, "keep close." We approached together. The watcher remained rooted behind us, as though bound to the passage by conflicting duties, guardian and rival. Holmes raised his hand. 1, 2, 3 taps, he murmured. A pause. 2 more. He struck the door in that precise sequence. The mechanism responded with a soft metallic click, followed by a deeper groan from the interior. The door shuddered, once, twice, then swung inward. The lantern's glow spilled into the room, and what lay beyond the threshold was nothing I had expected. It was not a chamber of occult horror, not a den of ritualistic madness. It was a meeting room, but twisted by time and neglect. Long tables, once polished, lay coated in a thick film of dust. Chairs, once arranged with formality, stood askew as though abandoned in haste. Papers littered the ground, most reduced to indistinguishable fragments, but a few bearing the faint outline of the sigil. A single lamp on the far wall sputtered with weak flame, fed by a nearly empty reservoir. But at the room's center stood a man. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in a black overcoat. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. He regarded us with an unsettling calm, as though expecting our arrival. "Sherlock Holmes," he said softly. Holmes froze. "You know me?" he asked. The man nodded. "All who belonged here know of you. You are the reason the door lay dormant. You are the reason the old circle fractured. Your interference, years ago, forced us into silence." Holmes stiffened, and for the first time I felt the presence of a chapter of his past he had never shared. "You are mistaken," Holmes said. "I have never stepped foot in this place." "Not in body," the man replied, "but in influence." He stepped closer, revealing sharp, sunken features. "The men who once gathered here lived in fear of exposure. Your cases, your deductions, your relentless pursuit of truth drove them to destroy their own network. And now, those few who remain intend to reforge it through means Penley tried to prevent." Holmes's voice dropped. "Penley was one of you." The man's eyes flickered. "He was meant to be, but he grew a conscience. He warned us," Holmes said. "He sought to stop you." The man's lips curved into a thin, cruel smile. "And now you will join him in failure." He lunged forward. Holmes reacted instantly, stepping aside with swift precision. I drew my revolver, but Holmes's voice cracked through the air. "No, Watson." The struggle that erupted was swift and brutal. Holmes met the man's attack with calculated strikes, each movement a blend of instinct and training honed over years of peril. The man fought with desperate strength, striking wildly as though driven by more than human rage. The watcher appeared at the doorway. For a heartbeat, I feared he would join the attack. Instead, he shouted, "Stop, you fool! You cannot kill him here. The others will know." But the gaunt man hurled him back with a single, vicious shove. Holmes seized the moment, striking the man across the jaw and driving him backward. The blow knocked him into the table, scattering papers like dead leaves. Holmes advanced, breath controlled. "Why reopen this place?" he demanded. "What purpose could justify murder?" The man gasped, clutching the table edge. "To regain what was lost," he spat. "Power, influence, control over those who believe themselves above consequence. This room was our sanctuary, and with the right men returning, it will be again." Holmes's voice became low and cold. "Not while I stand." The man screamed and lunged once more, but Holmes sidestepped. The attacker collided with the lantern stand. The flame collapsed, and smoke surged upward, choking the room. "Watson, the door!" Holmes shouted. I reached for it, but the watcher appeared beside me, grabbing my arm, not to restrain, but to pull me clear of falling debris as part of the ceiling groaned under shifting weight. "Out!" he barked. "The room is collapsing." Holmes dragged the gaunt man toward the exit, but the man tore free with a crazed snarl. "No, I will not abandon this place," Holmes shouted after him, but the man disappeared into the thickening smoke. We staggered out into the alley mere seconds before the door shuddered violently. A muffled crash sounded inside, wood splintering, stone cracking, and the faint glow beneath the threshold vanished. Holmes braced himself against the wall, coughing hard. The watcher stood nearby, chest heaving. He stared at the door with an unreadable expression, anger, grief, or relief. I could not tell. "It is done," Holmes said hoarsely. "The circle is broken." The watcher met his gaze. "You do not understand. That man was only one. There are others. But tonight you have ended their gathering." Holmes straightened, the full force of his will returning to his posture. "Then let them come. I will be waiting." The watcher took a step back into the street's darkness. "You have meddled with a world meant to remain unseen," he said softly. "But perhaps it is better that you did." Holmes watched him vanish into the night. We left the alley in silence. When Baker Street's familiar warmth enveloped us once more, Holmes removed his coat with slow, deliberate movements. He placed the ledger upon the mantel. "It is finished," I said. Holmes shook his head. "No, not finished, but delayed. And sometimes, Watson, delay is victory." He sat before the fire, eyes reflecting the flames. "The door," he murmured, "is closed, and may it never open again." And so ended the case of the alley that whispered and the door that nearly answered.